By 1972, British troops had been in Northern Ireland for 3 years and had long since lost the support of the Catholic community. They were seen as propping up Stormont, the Protestant-dominated parliament that had ruled since 1922, when the country was partitioned from the rest of Ireland. They were also held responsible for civilian deaths, and in many predominantly Catholic neighbourhoods, the soldiers were anything but welcome.
And this is actually where I was born and lived for the first 8 years of my life. I think what the army never banked on here was the closeness of community, and this happens all over in these ghetto areas all over Northern Ireland, that when they were oppressed, instead of getting the better of them, they all stuck together and they all had something in common. I mean, they had nothing to lose really, because so many of them hadn't got anything.
Protestant neighbourhoods were just as tribal, and many of them too felt they had nothing to lose. Sadly, the paramilitary groups found it easy to recruit members on both sides of the fence. The violence reached its height in 1972, with 500 deaths and 5,000 casualties. By then, the Provisional IRA had declared war on Britain. It wanted a united Ireland, and it was prepared to cause havoc to get it. One bomb attack in March 1972 was on the Abercorn restaurant in central Belfast. It was full of women and children. 2 were killed, over 130 maimed. My own parents were nearly caught up in the blast. A young reporter, Gloria Honeyford, covered the clear-up. She recalls the scene just after the dead and injured were taken to hospital.
That was the first time I had experienced the aftermath of a bomb at close quarter. And I was absolutely horrified, because tights, women's tights, you would have seen tights with one leg of the tights blown off. You've seen leather handbags that had been absolutely blown flat. Every seam had just been blown out of it. You've seen a teddy bear that was all charred down the side of one face. But that day it was really brought home to me, the futility of it all. All these, men, women, children, young people in the prime of their lives, who had all been caught in that bomb just because they happened to be out shopping on a Saturday afternoon.
IRA bombs didn't just kill and maim. They terrorised and paralysed the country.
Come on, let them go. Come on, let them go.
When I was about maybe 8 or 9, so this would have been 73, 74, my father went to pay the car tax and at the county hall. And my sister and I were in the car. He left us in the car park, went into the town hall. We both fell asleep, I think, in the car, and woke up to this bell, alarm bell ringing, and we saw people kind of running out in the distance from the evacuating the hall. And, we were very young, didn't really know what was going on. This guy this old warden came running over, said, get out, there's a bomb, come with me. So we got out of the car and we were running up to the clearing, and then as we were running up, we saw my father clearly running down and trying to break through to get to us. And then there was this very dull thud. And a huge smoke, and we went down, and the car beside us had a car bomb in it. And I recall my father's fear. But the other thing we remember is after school we'd gone to my grandmother's to pick up a dozen eggs, and the car was destroyed, but in the boot, the eggs, like 10 of them, were just perfectly intact.
Nobody was immune from the violence, not even the wealthy, largely Protestant business class who made up Northern Ireland's elite.
When I was very little, we lived closer to Belfast, and my father's business was blown up twice in the early 70s, and my uncle's house was burned down. And at that point, we moved to a place called Cultraw. I guess it was a bit of a bubble. But on the other hand, I also think my parents worked probably pretty hard to make sure that we weren't as worried as certainly they were. Sometimes I think of back to those days in Northern Ireland, and it's a little bit like that scene in Carry On Up the Khyber, where Everyone's sort of sitting around a dinner table as the cannonballs are showering in, and sort of nobody's paying any attention to what's happening outside and sort of passing the port. I suppose our parents didn't want us to be terrified out of our wits.
There is a predicament when you're in a place like Northern Ireland during the Troubles and you have teenage children, is when I'm thinking of, because you have no thought of moving away, and yet you have to try and lead as normal a life as possible for the sake of your family life and your children and their well-being. But you had to make them particularly aware that they weren't allowed to go up certain roads at night. By necessity, we had to know where our children were going. You couldn't just let them go to a disco in Belfast and hope that that disco didn't get blown up. I had to know where they were.
During the height of the mid-70s Troubles, actor Charlie Lawson had been sent to Northern Ireland's most prestigious boarding school.
Charlie, I suppose most people know you as Jim MacDonald in Coronation Street, and I suppose because of the strength of that character and the popularity of that character, they wouldn't associate you, the person, with an education in a building as fine as this, Campbell College in Belfast.
No, you're right, Eamon. I mean, that is, 10 years of my life I've played that character, and he certainly wasn't from this background, but, as I say, I was firmly middle class. I mean, yourself, you wouldn't have been at a school like this,
No,
because
but
there were no Catholics here.
So you and I wouldn't have met in the mid-70s.
There's not a chance. The schools we played at rugby were Protestant
Gaelic
schools.
football.
You played Gaelic football. There you go, you see. And it was as simple as that. And I wouldn't have met you at all, Eamon,
Yeah.
And I have to say, I probably wouldn't have wanted to. No, but, that's what it was like.
That's true.
It is true.
The young Charlie may have enjoyed a privileged education, but as the IRA's terror campaign intensified, he became sympathetic to those on the opposite side of the sectarian divide, the loyalist paramilitaries.
The older I got, funnily enough, the further I wanted to be from this institution and the closer I wanted to be to out there, because you started to meet people, working class people, and maybe that's the thing that just all young men do, but it certainly affected me, and I found myself, in a sense, trying to go in the more, as you say, in the more working class direction of politics, in inverted commas, as opposed to the natural progression that would have been for me towards the Unionist Party in inverted commas.
But that meant getting your hands dirty. That would have meant being out there chucking stones, chucking petrol bombs, talking about paramilitary involvement. Which
I obviously didn't do. However, over the years, latterly, I did meet some interesting characters, shall we say. And although I never dipped my toe in those waters, Eamon, it was something that you were very sort of proud to be, if you like, a loyalist. That was something that I aspired to. Had I spent longer here, then I might easily have got involved. Two of my very close friends did 13 years for conspiracy and possession of firearms.
In response to IRA violence throughout the mid-70s, loyalist paramilitaries gained ground. The Ulster Defence Association, or UDA, and the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, recruited heavily in working-class, staunchly Protestant areas like Belfast's Shankill Road. It was places like this where the teenage Charlie came to hang out.
What was here was the end of unionism and loyalism that my mindset was lent towards. Even though they were killing and blowing people up, it's extraordinary, really, isn't it? Conflict does make things completely different. It's not a real life experience, and I don't mean that in a flippant way. What I mean is that life is never cheap, but in a sense, people accepted it because